Welcome to a space where creativity comes to life. On this channel, every video is crafted to tell a story, spark emotion, and inspire new perspectives. If you enjoy content with meaning and style, consider subscribing and becoming part of this creative journey.
It started the way most things do in a long marriage. Quietly, without warning, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was at the hardware store on Clement Street, not because I needed anything in particular, but because walking those aisles had always helped me think. There's something about the smell of cut wood and machine oil that settles my mind. I'd been restless all week without being able to name why. My wife, I'll call her Nora, had been distant the past couple of months, but I told myself it was stress. She'd been promoted at Meridian Financial 8 months ago, longer hours, more travel. I'd been picking up the slack at home with our two boys, Kyle and Brendan, 9 and 12. I figured the distance between us was just a season of life we'd have to push through. I was standing in the plumbing section, staring at a wall of fittings I didn't need when I heard my name. Jim? Jim Halstead? I turned around. It was a guy named Russell Page. We'd met maybe a dozen times over the years at company picnics and neighborhood cookouts. His wife Loretta worked with Nora at Meridian. We were never close, but we were always friendly in that way. You are with someone in your extended orbit. He looked tired, and when he shook my hand, his grip was absent-minded, like his head was somewhere else entirely. We made small talk for a minute before he mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Loretta was flying out Thursday morning. Girls' weekend in Scottsdale, apparently. Some spa retreat Nora had organized. I said nothing for a second. Then I said, Nora's going to Seattle Thursday, for work. Russell looked at me. I looked at Russell. The plumbing aisle got very quiet. We ended up at the coffee shop around the corner, a narrow place with bad chairs and good espresso. We sat across from each other for a while without saying the obvious thing. Russell ordered a black coffee and stirred it like he was trying to find something at the bottom of the cup. I watched him and felt my chest do something uncomfortable. He was the one who finally said it. They're not going on separate trips, are they? It wasn't a question. We spent 2 hours at that table. Not arguing, not even that emotional, really. Just two men slowly assembling a picture neither of us had wanted to look at. Loretta had been working late Tuesdays and Thursdays for the past 3 months, same as Nora. Both of them had new gym bags they actually used, which was new. Loretta had mentioned a work friend named Davis enough times to become background noise. When Russell asked who Davis was, she'd said, "Just someone from the Chicago office," in a tone that ended the conversation. I thought back to Nora on the phone 2 Sundays ago, laughing at something in the kitchen while I was upstairs putting the boys to bed. When I came down, she was just standing there at the counter looking at her screen and smiling in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. I'd been glad she seemed happy. I drove home feeling like the walls of the car were closer than they should be. Nora was in the kitchen making pasta, completely ordinary, asking me if Kyle had finished his book report. I sat down at the island and watched her and answered in the right places and felt something fundamental shift in how I understood my own house. After dinner, while she was watching something on her laptop with headphones in, I went upstairs on the pretense of doing laundry. Her travel bag was already half packed on the closet floor. I told myself I wasn't going to look. Then I looked. The clothes were wrong for a work trip to Seattle. The dress was wrong. The overnight bag tucked inside her main bag had things in it that didn't fit a professional trip or a weekend with just women. At the back of the folded jeans I found a card. A small one, the kind that comes with flowers. It said, "Can't wait. D." I put it back exactly where it was. I finished folding the laundry and carried it down the hall and sat on the edge of my son's bedroom watching him sleep for longer than I meant to. The next morning I called Russell on his cell before 8. He'd found some things too. Hotel receipts forwarded to a shared account that Loretta had apparently forgotten he still had access to. 2 reservations. Scottsdale. Under 2 names neither of us recognized, which we both understood meant something. We agreed to meet at the coffee shop again at 9. This time, we were faster. The grief was still there, but we moved past it to practical things, which I think is how men process betrayal. Not by sitting with it, but by doing something about it. Russell knew someone at Meridian from a previous job, a woman named Patricia in the corporate compliance office. He called her from the parking lot. She didn't say much on the phone, but she agreed to see us in person. Patricia met us in the lobby of the Meridian building at 11. She looked like someone who'd been waiting a long time for a conversation she'd known was coming. She led us into a small conference room and closed the door. She gave us 2 names without us having to push hard. Davis Wren and Coleman Fitch. Both regional managers, both Apparently, not a secret to anyone in the building except the two of us. Patricia said the word around the office was that Davis and Coleman had been running what people quietly called a rotation, married women, mostly, for close to 2 years. She said she flagged it internally once. She'd been told it wasn't actionable unless a formal complaint was filed. She looked at us when she said that last part. Russell filed a formal complaint on the spot. I asked for a piece of paper and filed one too. Patricia printed something and slid it across the table. Scottsdale reservation, both couples. Same resort, adjoining villas. We thanked her and left. In the parking garage, Russell stopped walking and leaned against the wall with his hands in his pockets. He looked at me and said, "So what do we actually do here?" And that's when we had the conversation that mattered more than anything that came after. Because my first instinct was a lawyer. File immediately. Go for everything. Make it fast and public. Russell was the one who slowed me down, and I'm glad he did. He walked me through it, standing there in the dim concrete of a parking garage, and it was one of the more clarifying conversations of my life. If we filed right now, today, before anything else was in place, we'd be handing over control. The lawyers would run the clock while Nora and Loretta built their own narratives. In a no-fault state, which ours is, fault doesn't change much in the settlement math. We'd be paying alimony while they figured out next steps, losing the house, or the schedule, or both while the courts sorted it out on their timeline. Losing access to our kids during a process that was designed to accommodate everyone equally, which in practice means nobody gets what they actually want. My brother went through this 2 years ago, Russell said. He filed the same week he found out. His ex had 6 months to position herself. He still pays her health insurance. We stood there for a while. "I want to be in the same city as my kids," I finally said. "Yeah," Russell said. "So we don't file yet." We drove separately to a diner on the edge of town and ordered lunch we mostly didn't eat. We went through our finances on paper napkins. I moved the conversation forward every time it threatened to stall. There was a window here, a small one. Nora was leaving Thursday morning. The trip was 4 nights. That was enough time. We both knew what we needed to document and what we needed to prepare. We made a list. We split it down the middle. I spent Wednesday doing things that felt mundane and were anything but. I moved money from our joint account to a personal one. Not all of it. Not even close. Just enough to cover immediate expenses and give myself a cushion. I met with a financial advisor my firm had used. A woman named Helen who didn't ask unnecessary questions and gave me a clear picture of where I stood. I photographed everything in the house that mattered to me. I backed up the family photos to my own cloud account, not the shared one. I arranged for the boys to spend the weekend at my mother's place in Riverside, an hour out. She asked me if everything was all right. I told her we had some things to sort out at home. Nora left Thursday morning in a rideshare. She kissed the boys goodbye and squeezed my hand at the door and looked me in the eyes and said she'd call that evening. She did not call that evening. Russell had a friend, an old college friend named Ted who did freelance video and photography work, weddings mostly. Ted lived in Phoenix. Russell called in every favor he had. Ted was available. It cost us both a few $100s, which felt like nothing. We flew out Friday morning on a 6 a.m. flight. Russell had Ted meet us at the airport. We checked into a budget hotel 3 miles from the resort under our own names because we weren't going to pretend otherwise. The resort wasn't hard to navigate. Big pool area, a central courtyard, the kind of place designed for adults who want to be seen relaxing. Ted knew his angles. We stayed well back. We got what we needed by Saturday afternoon. I won't describe every detail except to say it was unambiguous. Poolside. The restaurant patio. Walking together through the courtyard in the evening. Nora in a sundress I'd never seen before, laughing at something Davis said, leaning into him in a way that had been absent from our own life for longer than I wanted to count. It hurt. I want to be honest about that. I'd steeled myself for it, and it still landed like something physical. Russell looked worse. He went back to the room and I gave him an hour. Saturday night, we ate room service and went through the photos with Ted. He edited what we needed. Clean, clear, time-stamped. We each kept copies in 3 different places. Sunday morning, Nora finally called. She said Seattle was busy but good. I said it sounds like it. She said she missed the boys. I said they missed her too. They were at Mom's. She said she'd see us Tuesday. I said sure. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed after I hung up and looked at the wall for a while. Then I got up and got dressed because there was still work to do. Before we flew home Sunday afternoon, we stopped at the resort's business center. Russell brought his laptop. We spent 90 minutes putting together what we'd later refer to, without much humor, as the newsletter. We had contact information for everyone who mattered. family on both sides, close friends, mutual social circles. And because neither of us had gone into this angry at everyone except the people responsible, we specifically excluded people who would be hurt unnecessarily, like Loretta's younger sister who was dealing with her own difficult year, or Nora's mother who had a heart condition. What remained was still a substantial list. The email was direct. It didn't editorialize. It said what was happening and included 3 photographs and noted that a 4th file was available to any family member who requested it for legal purposes. We sent it at 4:37 p.m. Pacific Time from the airport lounge while waiting for boarding. Russell also forwarded the documentation to Patricia at Meridian with a note referencing our formal complaints from earlier in the week. We boarded the plane. Russell ordered a beer as soon as the car came by. I had water. We didn't talk much on the flight home. There wasn't much that needed saying. My phone started going off somewhere over Nevada. I turned it face down on the tray table and left it there. The boys were at my mother's until Tuesday. I went home to a quiet house and stood in the kitchen for a minute getting used to it. Then I cleaned the kitchen, which needed it, and made myself a real dinner, and watched an old movie I'd been meaning to watch for 3 years, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. The next morning, I contacted an attorney named Frank Weston, who had been recommended to me by someone at my firm. We met for 2 hours. I showed him everything. He didn't say the word divorce until I did. When I did, he nodded and said, "All right, let's talk about how to do this correctly." We filed Tuesday afternoon 2 hours before Nora's flight was scheduled to land. She didn't come home that night. I found out from Kyle, who called me from my mother's in tears, that Nora had called them to say she was going to stay with her friend Rachel for a few days. Kyle didn't understand. Brendan, who is older and had apparently picked up on more than I realized, went very quiet on the phone and asked me if Mom was coming back. I told him the truth in the most careful version I could manage. He was quiet for another moment and then said, "Okay, Dad." Those 2 words broke something open in me that I hadn't let open yet, standing in my own hallway. I held the phone against my chest until it passed. I asked my mother to keep the boys through the weekend, and she said, of course, no questions. The house was strange without them. I have never been someone who deals well with empty rooms. Russell's situation moved faster. Loretta came home Monday evening, apparently unaware that he'd already been in contact with an attorney. She found her key cards and credit cards deactivated and a note on the kitchen table with Frank's contact information and a request to coordinate through counsel. Russell had moved out to his brother's place. He'd taken everything that was his and photographed every room before leaving, clean and careful. She called him 16 times Monday night. He answered once and said 3 sentences, then referred her back to the note. The next 3 weeks were not easy. I won't pretend otherwise. Nora came to the house twice while I was at work and took things. I had documented everything beforehand, so nothing was taken that shouldn't have been. Her attorney contacted Frank within the week. The initial filing had moved things into official channels faster than she'd apparently expected. She called me once at 7 in the morning, and the call was mostly her crying. I listened. I said I was sorry it had come to this. She said something about not knowing what had happened to us, and I thought, quietly, that I knew exactly what had happened to us and who had made it happen, but I didn't say that. What I said was, "We'll make sure the boys are all right. That's what matters now." She agreed. Through tears, she agreed. The custody arrangement that eventually emerged was reasonable, and I think it was reasonable because we both wanted it to be. Kyle and Brendan stayed in the school district. They lived primarily with me because that's what made sense for their routines and because Nora, to her credit, understood that the stability she'd disrupted required something from her in return. She had them alternate weekends and every Wednesday. It wasn't ideal for anyone. It was functional. Davis Wren and Coleman Fitch both left Meridian within 60 days of our formal complaints, which Patricia confirmed when I ran into her at a grocery store in October. She looked tired, but she nodded when she saw me in a way that meant she didn't need to say anything. There's a version of this story where I tell you it all got better quickly, where I say I moved on and the boys adjusted and the whole thing settled into something manageable by Christmas. And some of that is true. The boys did adjust. Kids are more resilient than adults, or at least they show it differently. I did move forward. Work helped. Keeping a routine helped. Getting back to running, which I'd abandoned for 2 years, helped more than anything. But there's also the night about 4 months in when Kyle came into my room at 2 in the morning and said he'd had a bad dream. He climbed into bed on his mother's side and went back to sleep within 5 minutes. I lay there in the dark for a long time after that, listening to him breathe, thinking about all the ways a family can come apart and what you owe your children when it does. You owe them everything. That much I'm sure of. Russell and I are still in touch. He remarried 2 years later. A woman named Anne, someone he'd known from college. I was at the wedding. I sat in the back row and watched him at the altar, looking like someone who'd walked through fire and come out lighter. And I thought, well, there it is. I'm not there yet. I'm not sure I need to be. What I have now is a house that smells like laundry and microwave popcorn and hockey equipment. 2 boys who tell me things they don't tell their mother. And a Tuesday night routine that involves bad television and good takeout, and that is, most days, enough. I'll keep you posted on the rest. There's something I've come to understand about the way consequences work, not as punishment handed down from somewhere above, but as the natural weight of choices accumulating over time. Nora made a series of decisions, each one small enough to rationalize in the moment, and together they dismantled something that took years to build. That's not a moral judgment. That's just how it works. You pull enough threads and eventually the whole thing comes apart, and no amount of crying in a food court or leaving tearful voicemails changes the physics of it. What I did, the documentation, the attorney, the careful preparation, wasn't revenge in the dramatic sense. I didn't enjoy it. There was no satisfaction in sitting in that Phoenix hotel room going through photographs of my wife holding another man's hand by a pool. What I felt was closer to grief with a deadline. I had a narrow window to act with clarity, and I used it. That's what I mean when I say intelligence saved me more than anger ever could have. Anger would have had me calling her the moment I found that card. Intelligence had me put it back exactly where it was and finish folding the laundry. Russell was the one who kept me from making the most expensive mistake of my life. Filing immediately from a place of hurt before anything was in place. I was ready to burn it all down the same week. He sat me down in a parking garage and walked me through what that would actually look like for my boys, my finances, my schedule, my life. That conversation cost nothing and protected everything. It's easy to confuse action with progress. Sometimes the smartest move is the one that looks like nothing from the outside. The hardest part wasn't any of the practical things. It was Kyle climbing into my bed at 2 in the morning, 4 months after everything settled, just needing to be near someone. It was Brendan going quiet on the phone and saying, "Okay, Dad," in that tone that's too old for a 12-year-old. Those moments don't resolve. You don't get to fix them. You just show up the next morning and the morning after that, and over time, the showing up becomes the thing they remember instead of the thing that broke. I think about Nora sometimes. Not with bitterness. That faded faster than I expected. More with a kind of tired clarity. She made her choices and lived with the results of them. Same as I'm living with the results of mine. The difference is, I chose to stay present. I chose the hard work of rebuilding instead of the easier work of disappearing. That choice is the only thing I'm actually proud of in this whole story. What I'd say to anyone in the middle of something like this is, slow down enough to think. Not forever. Just long enough to be strategic instead of reactive. Protect your kids first, your finances second, your dignity third. In roughly that order. The rest has a way of sorting itself out if you give it enough time and enough honesty. I'm still sorting. Some of it has. And the house smells like hockey equipment and microwave popcorn. And most nights that's enough.